Welcome to FedScoopTV. I'm Dan Verton. We're here today with Mike Younkers, Director of Systems Engineering Sales at Cisco. Mike, thanks so much for being here.
Sure, I'm happy to be here.
I want to talk a little bit about open source and get your take on the evolution of open source, where it's going today, some of the trends you're seeing.
Yeah, I really see kind of two big trends from where I sit in the IT industry from Cisco. And the first is around the mainstream adoption of open source. I mean, it's really interesting to see that it is a mainstream alternative to the standard proprietary solutions. In the beginning, there were these concerns about security and supportability, and I think Red Hat's done a great job of addressing both of those with the adoption of the security enhancements to Linux through SE Linux, and also through providing a really innovative support model. So they've taken care of that issue, and open source is really taking off in the mainstream.
Right.
The second trend I see is that it's broadening way outside of operating systems, middleware, and even virtualization. And you look at a company like Cisco and what we're doing with Open Daylight, we're going into the network now and open sourcing the network itself. Things like orchestration that's being done through OpenStack and those types of things, automation through Puppet and Chef. I mean, all layers of the IT stack, if you will, are going open source. And I think that's a big trend that's upon us now.
Right. Yeah, I understand from other interviews that basically the question of security it's not asked anymore.
You know, it's funny, when I first started learning about security back in the day when we talked about encryption, one of the fundamental premises was you can't get security through obscurity, and you have to publish encryption algorithms in the public space so everyone can look at them and you can prove that they're secure, right? But we sort of had this funny mentality that proprietary operating systems were somehow more secure, but it's neat now that in the open source with the community looking at it, there's inherently more security.
Right. And I think we're starting to see that, especially over in Europe. They're now talking about open source as the answer to some of their concerns.
Sure, absolutely.
It's very interesting. So are any particular areas in government that you see a more rapid pace of adoption than others?
In the beginning, I think it was exactly where we thought it would come from. Places like the scientific community, both in civilian and DoD, and then the national labs and places like that. And we saw it kind of going into NASA, and so exactly where you would expect it to be. What I'm finding a lot more recently, though, is it's kind of exciting that it's branching out from there, and the government's looking at it because it solves a lot of its problems. The government hates to be locked into a vendor, so open source gives you the ability, standards-based, to kind of have some portability, whether you're doing on-premise stuff or ultimately trying to go to the cloud. You have this mobility, so you're not locked in, and the government really likes that. In addition to that, where they're really want to kind of get projects moving in a faster way, they can build on top of things that already exist in open source. So it kind of allows for rapid prototype, rapid development. And then obviously, the cost benefit to it. Right. It's not free, but there is a very strong return on investment. So it's starting to spread out across the government. I'm really excited about places like Department of Homeland Security that you think about. They're very concerned about security. They're leveraging open source. The National Security Agency. I was at the Open Source Software Institute's NSA Industry Day, and Dr. Dowd talked about the fact that open source is at the heart of the transformation that agency is going through. So you look at it, it's spread from kind of the scientific space throughout civilian and DoD all the way down now in our most secure agencies inside the government. It's everywhere.
That's interesting. So can you point to any examples in the government that might be a good lessons learned for folks in the private sector? And vice versa. Is anything happening in the private sector that maybe the government should be aware of?
I certainly believe that the government's in the lead here, and it's really refreshing to kind of see the government. A lot of people from industry look at the government as sometimes a technology laggard, but in this case, they are leading the way. I think there's a few lessons that private industry could learn from the government, specifically around use it. I think that in my experience in industry, we still haven't adopted mainstream open source across the board for our own internal IT infrastructure. So I think that's kind of the first lesson, is start using it. It's there. And then the next lesson to kind of build on that is that it's not free. So don't think you're going to, that you're somehow going to get some magical free, IT stack, right? You have a responsibility to support it inside your own organization and also to support the community. So I think industry could look to the government to see what the government's done to do things like the security enhancements that have been pushed out. I think that's something that industry can do to do more and more of that, taking our innovation from industry and pushing it out into open source. So that's kind of a second lesson learned. And then the final one, I think, is really about building on top of open source. So in industry, we're trying to figure out innovative ways to solve customer problems. And instead of spending so much time in the underlying IT stack where those problems have already been solved, we need to innovate on top of that. So I think there's a lesson for us to learn in industry to stop reinventing that wheel, take advantage of what's already done, do it in an open community, and then innovate on top of that to drive customer solutions. I like to talk about, let's focus on IT to solve mission problems instead of focusing on IT for IT's sake.
Right, great. Let me ask you to take out your crystal ball for folks
Sure.
and look a couple of years down the road and tell me where you see the evolution of open source going.
Yeah, I'll stay, nothing radical in my opinion on this. I'll stay relatively conservative, and really what I think happening is it's just open source is going to continue to put proprietary solutions under more and more pressure. And I think that you look at what's going on in the networking space, again, that's where I come from Cisco, and the projects that are there to open up through like software-defined networking and things like that, that's a great example of how the open source community is putting pressure on what traditionally has been proprietary type stacks. I mean, things were built from standards based, but everyone kind of did it their own way. That's a great example of something. So I think that pressure is going to drive more and more openness. Things that were traditionally proprietary, companies are going to start to push that stuff out into the open source. And again, they'll innovate on top of it. So I think that's kind of a really exciting thing for us. And then, kind of the final piece that I see really happening in the future is it's going to happen at every single layer of the IT stack. It's not going to stay in operating systems or middleware or virtualization. It's going to happen all up and down the IT stack. So as a consumer of information technology, big enterprise, even us at home, we're all going to benefit from this because we're going to have this great community that's doing great innovation on our behalf very quickly, so we're all going to benefit from it.
Are we all going to be more secure?
I absolutely believe, I'm bought into the fact that the wider the community is that's reviewing what we're doing, the more inherent security we have in that solution.
Great. Well, Mike Younkers, thanks so much for coming by today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
FedScoopTV, I'm Dan Verton. Thanks for watching.